Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
For the first time that I can remember, we went to bed together and didn't have a night. The next night was even worse, and I was a part of it. We went out to eat at McDonald's since I refused to cook for Fred. We ate and watched TV. We'd been together constantly since Fred saw what he saw. Suddenly, we heard the sound of an engine roaring in my driveway. I was sure it was the sound of Terry's Mustang. I'd heard it enough times to distinguish this exhaust note from any other. I looked out the window but didn't see anything. Fred ran outside and walked around the yard. There were no hidden speakers or anything like that anywhere on the lawn or porch. When we returned to the house, we were already arguing. It was Terry's Mustang. I sobbed. But it was destroyed. I saw it myself. It could have been anyone, Fred said as we closed the door behind us. I turned around to yell at Fred and noticed that his eyes were huge. I turned back and saw him myself. Terry stood behind me, looking for something. Then he looked up and saw us. His mouth opened as if he was trying to say something, but nothing came out. His face contorted with rage, and I heard the words. The voice was distorted and full of anger. "Get out of my house," he said. There wasn't a trace of love for me in his eyes. The only emotions I saw were anger and hatred. Fred and I both ran out of the house. We sat on the side of the road for over an hour before we gathered the courage to go back inside. Fred demanded that I go into the bathroom with him so he could shower. During the encounter with Terry's ghost, he had peed himself. That night, we got on the internet and started looking for factual information about ghosts and apparitions. Most of what we found was contradictory and just seemed crazy. Each article seemed to say different things about the spirits of the dead. The only thing they all agreed on was that ghosts are the spirits of people who have died, leaving something unfinished or in need of resolution. This description fit Terry very well. Fred and I were afraid to be in the house. We clung to each other to find courage in our shared fear. We decided that one of us would stay awake while the other slept, changing every 2 hours. In fact, now that I had gotten over the shock, I wanted to see Terry again. I wanted to apologize to him for everything I had done. Fred made another one of his phone calls while I was trying to sleep. I didn't hear what was said, but after the conversation, his mood improved so much that he started pestering me. I turned away and fell asleep. "You," he said. "Isn't that what you were trying to do?" I asked. "As soon as we get the money, I'll leave," he said. "You will deal with your ghost yourself." "Terry!" I laughed heartily when I sat down. I looked around the small space I had rented and at the arsenal of lasers and other equipment we had installed. "It's so good to hear you laugh again," said a voice next to me. Hearing these words, I nodded and then remembered how I got to this point. I think it all started about a month ago when the scales fell from my eyes. I discovered many things about the woman I married. Most of what I realized was unpleasant. I also finally understood how much of a fool I had been towards her. I think I could describe the last 5 years as fat and happy. For those who have trouble spelling, fat and happy is spelled TPOY. I fell in love with Brittany without realizing that we were the same and, at the same time, very different. I loved Brittany with all my heart and soul. I really enjoyed busting my 5th place to give her things. The problem was that I never noticed that Brittany didn't love me the same way. Brittany seemed to only love that I loved her. Because I loved her almost as much as she loved herself, we belonged to each other. We spent 5 years locked in our mutual love for her. I considered her the person I loved more than anything in the world. I would gladly sacrifice my life for her. She treated me with the same level of care and affection that one would show to a puppy or other beloved pet. She was very kind to me. She made sure I had everything I needed to be happy. Our life together was very joyful. We even had, as I thought, a very intense nightlife. We made all the plans that ordinary couples make. We even discussed when we would start having perfect children, as Brittany said. However, as they say, man proposes, God disposes. Until recently, this year was both up and down for me. It was filled with uplifting highs and absolutely dismal lows. But through it all, I had Brittany, my heart, my soul, and my anchor. Brittany was there to lift me up during the tough times and keep me grounded when I was at my best. The highlight of my life was receiving an engineering award and being recognized at a ceremony hosted by my company. The low point, I thought until recently, was seeing the 2015 Mustang, or what Ford called the new Mustang. I really liked what they were trying to do. I liked the rear of the car, and I don't think the sides bothered me too much. I understand the logic behind the engine choices, although for us purists, nothing will ever beat AV8. The independent rear suspension, along with the improved handling, makes me delighted. But then they disappointed us by making the front end of the car the same as the damn Fusion. Don't get me wrong, the Fusion is a good car, but I wouldn't put a horse on it and call it a Mustang. In general, immediately after the ceremony, Brittany began to behave strangely. I decided to keep an eye on her to figure out what was going on. When a woman suddenly makes major changes in her life, there is usually a reason for it. Brittany, who hadn't done any training since she quit cheerleading, made me suspicious. So one day, I used my lunch break to go and watch her at the sports club she had joined. Several of my friends had told me that when a woman reaches 30, she changes. I knew that Brittany's appearance was an important part of her self-perception, and I thought that was why she suddenly wanted to train. She didn't even try to hide what she was doing. I walked into a large gym full of exercise equipment and saw my wife making out with the same giant steroid jock I had seen her talking to at my awards ceremony. It was obvious from the way they kissed that they were doing more than that. To say that my heart was broken would be an understatement, but they were both adults, and neither of them seemed to care about anything but each other. I loved Brittany with all my heart. If this guy had attacked her or tried to force himself on her, I would probably be dead or in jail right now because I would have given my life or taken his to save her. However, it was clear that Brittany gave him as much as she received. I was ready to fight for Brittany to my last breath, but I would never humiliate myself by fighting for her. I also had no intention of funding her infidelity. The club manager was very helpful. He returned the full amount to me and promised to look into the matter. When we agreed on the refund amount, I reminded him that I had not actually paid the full price. I received a discount through my company's health plan. His eyes widened when I told him what company I worked for. I went back to work as if nothing had happened. As usual, when I had a problem, I locked myself in my office and worked. Work was a great way for me to think. That afternoon, I decided to give Brittany what she wanted. I mean, she obviously wanted that hunk on steroids. Who was I to stand in the way of true love? Even in my 30s, I have to admit that I was not a big party animal. I wasn't a womanizer, a Lothario, a Casanova, or any of these other smooth European lovers. I was no expert on women or the art and science of love. Although I had several relationships in college, Brittany was my first and only true love. So faced with Brittany's betrayal, I turned to what I knew. I looked at our marriage like designing and manufacturing a car or any modern engineering project. I broke the situation down into its individual components and assigned different levels of urgency and importance to each. First, I needed to stabilize my emotions. The best way for me to do this was to isolate myself from the source of my pain while I tried to recover. This meant that I needed to get away from Brittany for a while. I thought of it like this: Brittany was a disease in a third world country. The first step that doctors took was to remove the patient from the conditions that allowed him to become infected. They did this by taking the person to the hospital. They could then begin treatment without the risk of reinfection before he developed immunity against the disease. So that night, when I got home, I avoided Brittany like the plague. Initially, I decided to tell her to get the hell out of my house. It seemed to me that she could go and live with the steroid barbarian. Now she was his, she wanted him, and she could have him. On the other hand, he could have her, but I couldn't do it. So I pressed pause. I went for a run and thought about the problem while wearing out my sneakers. I learned a lot during those 40 minutes of running. I realized that there are a variety of instruments in an orchestra. Usually, when I listen to music, I focus on guitar riffs. It makes sense because I used to play guitar. However, during those 40 minutes, I realized that not everything has to be visible and in your face, like a spectacular guitar riff. I also realized that Myron Grombacher is God. Myron Grombacher is Pat Benatar's drummer, and I mean drummer with a capital D, because everyone knows that there are drummers and there are drummers. A drummer is like a metronome or a track. He keeps the rhythm, no more and no less. He makes sure that all the other instruments stay on time. However, the drummer really adds something to the song. He is so much a part of the music that without him, the song loses its meaning. While I ran, I listened to my usual eclectic mix of rock, pop, country, classical, and metal. I found myself scrolling through some of Pat Benatar's later albums and remembered watching some of her videos on YouTube. Myron Grombacher is the first and only drummer I remember who played standing up. As I listened to the music, I realized that I didn't have to get in Britney's face to get my point across. If she wanted a man to dominate her, maybe that was why she needed Captain Steroid, but I wasn't that man. Perhaps this was the case, perhaps we just grew apart. Perhaps she was not wrong in what she did, perhaps the only mistake was the way she did it. Maybe in many years, we can meet and talk about this, I really hoped so. But at that moment, it was not what I needed. Throughout our life together, like any good husband, I put Britney's needs first. However, in this situation, I needed to be a little selfish and take care of my own needs and my own pain. My greatest need was to be free from pain, and Britney was the source of my pain. For the first time since we met, my pain became stronger than my love. But after taking a lesson from my own experience, I decided to be less confrontational. Instead of rushing in and beating my chest, I waited for her to come to me. Then, without raising my voice, I suggested that she spend some time with her parents because we needed, or I needed, some space. It worked. With Britney leaving, I was able to further structure my problem. I needed to decide if what she did was so bad that we couldn't stay together anymore. I needed to get rid of the pain I was feeling, and I needed to decide what to do after making that decision. If we couldn't stay together, it would be pretty easy, we would get divorced. If we still stayed together, it would be even worse. I needed to figure out whether to just forgive her with a stern warning, go to counseling, or set up some kind of prenuptial agreement with strict sanctions in case she ever did it again. Getting rid of the pain turned out to be more difficult than I thought. It's like having a headache, you can't just think, stop being sick. It usually takes a combination of time and something to dull the pain while it lasts. Although I've never been a heavy drinker, during those first few days, I got drunk every night and felt terrible every day, trying to recover from the previous one. A couple of days later, I arrived at work to find my secretary, Christina, in emergency mode. "What did she do?" she asked. It was the first time she had said anything bad about Britney, but I realized that it was also the first time she didn't love my wife. "I don't want to talk about it," I said. "It's personal." "I'm human," she snapped, then turned on her heel and went to get a cup of coffee for me. Setting the cup down, she looked at me. "I'm giving it to her once, but if she hurts you again," I saw her green eyes change color with anger. Christina was always cheerful, she always lifted my spirits and made me feel like everything we were doing was great. If a supplier was unhappy with a change we made, Christina was convinced they were fools because we were perfect. That little conversation with Christina made me realize that the way I was treating my Britney problem was not working for me. "Christina," I said quietly. Her eyes sparkled. Without understanding the details of the situation, I had crossed the line. "This is the first time you've used anything other than my full name," she said. "I'm sorry," I began. "Don't," she said sharply. "I liked it. Now what do you want?" "I was just wondering, you've always been so cheerful. What do you do when you're sad?" "I'm talking to you," she answered quietly. Her small smile warmed my broken heart. I was so busy with thoughts and plans that I almost forgot about lunch. Christina brought pizza from Domino's. My thoughts continued to spin in the same circle. I loved Britney with all my heart. Until recently, I truly believed that she felt the same way. However, the evidence did not appear to support this. During our relationship, I met many attractive women, but none of them caught my attention. I think I was so in love with Britney that other women just didn't register. Apparently, Britney didn't feel the same way. I had no way of knowing if this was the first time she cheated on me or if she did it all the time. The main red flag for me was that she was even capable of doing this. I couldn't handle it. The thought of having an intimate with another woman seemed foreign to me. I knew it would hurt Britney, so I felt bad just thinking about it. Not only could Britney do it, but she did do it, so in my mind, she just didn't love me the way I loved her. I think that in modern society, the concepts of love and night are not always connected, but for me, they still are. There was also the issue of trust. How the hell could I ever trust her again? And if I couldn't trust her, how could we be married? I hated the thought of running around and trying to keep track of her every second of every day. It would just exhaust me. I'd be better off alone, just starting to wonder how my life would be different as a single man. Divorced, Christina returned to my office. She threw the magazine on my table. "Pack the car," she said. The tone in which she said this sounded like a challenge. "Instead of drinking yourself to death, do something constructive." "What?" I asked. "You don't like the new Mustang, so build the old one." In the magazine she had abandoned, there were several advertisements for the sale of old Mustangs. The one that really caught my attention was the '67 Fastback. Even looking at the car in its current less than ideal condition, I began to imagine what capabilities it had. This was the moment I stopped imitating the alcoholic and started designing my own modifications for the car. I threw myself into it, and it helped. The next thing I did was start looking for a lawyer. I realized while she was away that things would never be the same between Brittany and me. I thought it would be better if I started over. I believed we'd both be happier in the end. I met with the lawyer several times before he drafted the paperwork. He described to me all the pros and cons of the divorce procedure, and he also wanted me to give myself time before making a final decision. The day Brittany left to be with her parents, I felt like my imitation of an alcoholic stopped. At first, I thought it was a good thing that Brittany didn't notice how much I was drinking. At that moment, I realized that if she really cared about me, she would have noticed. I worked on the car almost every night, buying so much alcohol that I drank a little now and then, but it was nothing like those first 2 nights when I ignored Brittany. A couple of days after Brittany left, I had a visitor. My father-in-law came to see me. He wanted me to believe that he was just passing by. However, it's hard to just drive by when you live 3 hours away by car. It didn't matter. I loved my father-in-law. We spent a pleasant few hours talking. He was amazed by my plans for the '67. I can talk about cars with anyone, so discussing my car with someone I both respected and liked was really fun. At some point in our conversation, we talked a little about the breakup between me and Brittany. I didn't tell him the reason for our problems. I thought it was Brittany's cross to bear since she caused the issues. But I think he realized that since I was the one who needed to get away from her for a while, then she was the one who had screwed up. I also think it didn't take him long to figure out what went wrong. Sure enough, a couple of days after our conversation, I returned home to find that Brittany was back. I didn't tell her she could come back, but according to my lawyer, I had no right to kick her out of our house. That day, I gave my lawyer permission to print the documents and hand them over. My lawyer also suggested hiring a good private investigator. I had to tell him that I was ahead of him on this matter. I had already hired a private investigator to equip the house with several cameras and a system that would record everything happening inside. My detective assured me that I would have enough evidence, and I needed it. My lawyer was able to get my case assigned to a judge who was very sensitive to the needs of people who had been victims of infidelity. The problem was that I didn't have any proof, and no matter how much Brittany claimed that she loved me, I was sure she wouldn't just go to court and admit everything. Every time Brittany and I spoke, she refused to even discuss divorce. I tried everything I could propose to her, but she was simply not ready to give up. I didn't want to do this, but I asked the detective to turn on the CCTV a couple of days after Brittany returned. Although I owned the house and had every right to install a CCTV system, Brittany could also, under the law of marriage, be considered the owner of the property and therefore had a legal right to expect a certain level of privacy. Consequently, despite what is shown on TV, it is not always possible to arrange surveillance of your own home. There are also cases where, even if you succeed, some judges simply will not allow the use of the data obtained. It was a legal gray area. My solution was to lie a little. I turned on the CCTV, and 2 days later, I told Brittany that I had installed a security system. I could always fake the dates. Brittany just smiled at me and said it was good that I was concerned about her safety. This made me realize that she somehow already knew about the system. The day after I returned home, I went into the office and looked at what I had received for the 3 days that the system was active. I had nothing, and I mean literally nothing. There must have been at least several hours of footage of empty rooms and of Brittany and me walking around the house, but there was only static on the screen. There was nothing, not even on the audio recordings. The private investigator concluded that either the system was improperly installed or there was some natural radio frequency interference in the home or surrounding area. He also told me that it was possible Brittany had someone working for her who created some kind of electronic jamming field that distorted the recordings. So there was a stalemate between me and Brittany. I couldn't really go to court without evidence, and Brittany couldn't convince me to give up the divorce. The bad news was that although she always told me it wouldn't happen again, she never admitted to having a night with the guy. If I had gone to court with what I had at the time, all I could have said was that I saw her kiss some guy. According to my lawyer, with that kind of evidence, we would probably end up in counseling for 6 months and then have to start all over again. My lawyer decided, with my permission, to go after this steroid king. We thought that if we brought a lot of charges against him, he would convince Brittany to go to peace to take the pressure off himself. We thought that if we put pressure on him, he would put pressure on Brittany. It would also prove that they were still in touch. In meetings between my lawyer and Brittany's lawyer, we always spoke as if we had a lot of evidence. In short, we were bluffing. We didn't actually have any video or audio, but they didn't need to know that. In the days that followed, I tried to keep my contact with Brittany to a minimum. However, it was difficult. I spent most of my time in the garage working on the 67. I had already removed most of the chrome parts and started taking off as much of the bodywork as possible. I planned to strip the car down to the frame and check for damage and rust. I was going to strengthen the frame for better handling by adding extra connections in all the critical areas. Next, I intended to powder coat the frame and begin the restoration. Brittany started trying to talk to me as often as possible, and she also did everything to tease me. I felt that her antics in this regard were below the belt because I still could not forget her. But as often happens, things took a strange turn. Just when we thought we were settling into the long game, I was determined to get a divorce, while Brittany fought tooth and nail for our marriage. For some reason, she seemed to believe that everyone was allowed to cheat once or twice. She continued to give me absolutely ridiculous statistics about marriages surviving infidelity. She even made a list of all the couples we knew who were happy despite one or both partners cheating. The morning the RM pass was broken seemed just like any other morning. I got up early and went to work much earlier than usual to avoid Brittany. As I stepped into the driveway with my briefcase in hand, I smiled. That's what my car meant to me. It was one of those things that only car enthusiasts can understand. Every time I saw this car, I smiled. Then I noticed it. If I had matte black wheels, I would never have noticed this. However, my rims were a very glossy black color, so I spotted the smear from 5 feet away. I thought it was just road dust or maybe even brake dust, but as I got closer, I noticed something that shouldn't be there. There were 2 drops of fluid near my front left tire. I started the car, like I always do, and drove slowly down the street and around the block. I pulled into a parking lot at a shopping center around the corner from my house. I was driving no more than 10 miles an hour, so I barely made it to the rise in the parking lot. In the parking lot, I made a huge curve until the car stopped. As I expected, the brake pedal sank all the way to the floor. I made 2 calls. The first was to my brother Ray. I told him what I suspected and what I had done. He said he would come right away. My second call was to Christina. I told her I would probably be late for work that morning. When my brother arrived and we talked, he said that calling Christina might have been a mistake. "We don't know who allegedly did it," he said. "You might have accidentally told the suspect that we suspected him. We don't know what his motives are. Christina might be mad at you for not giving her a raise. Hell, you might have forgotten about her birthday or not noticed her new hairstyle. You can't just give out information. You can't trust anyone until they're ruled out as suspects. Everyone's a suspect." "Damn," I said. "I probably shouldn't have called you either. Mom always loved me more. Maybe you're jealous of me." "Ha, man," he said. He looked at my car and shook his head. He walked around it completely. "There's not a single scratch on it. Why do you think someone damaged it?" I just looked at him. He picked up the phone and called someone named Bert. He told Bert to come here quickly and gave him the address. We went to a diner and had breakfast while we waited. About half an hour later, an old pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Ray and I walked out to the truck. As soon as I saw the truck and realized how raised it was off the ground, I had an idea of who Bert was. I imagined a burly guy named Sam with a huge mustache, but I was wrong. Bert turned out to be a woman, and what a woman. Bert, short for Robert, was 4 feet 11 inches tall, with red hair, long legs, and huge breasts for her height. Ray pointed to my car, and she walked towards it. The word Bert doesn't do a strong enough job of describing what she did. When she approached the car, she walked around it in a complete circle. He thinks, Ray began, but Bert quickly raised her tiny hand to silence him. "I've been thinking," she said. Her obvious southern accent contrasted with the high pitch and raspy quality of her voice. "There's nothing wrong with this car, except that the owner's most likely one of those gothic types. Everything on this car is black, it probably just ran out of gas." She pronounced the word gasoline as if it had 2 syllables, and it sounded like petrol. As I listened to her, I looked at what she probably called her petrol and fell in love with her. Everything she said made me think. I could smell the magnolia trees in bloom. "Bert, this is my brother Terry," Ray said sharply. "It's his car, and he thinks his brake lines were cut." She looked at me and walked around me just like she did with the car. "Do you live in this parking lot?" she asked. "No, I don't live," I started to say, but without realizing it, I began to sound like her. She raised one eyebrow, and my brother started laughing. I opened the door and started the engine. She tried the brakes and noticed that there was no pressure. "How the hell did you get here in one piece?" she asked. I noticed that when she was being professional, her accent almost disappeared. "That is, of course, assuming your brakes were actually damaged." I drove slowly, using the lean to lose some momentum, and made a big circle with my foot on the brake. When I slowed down enough, I jerked the steering wheel into a sharp turn. As soon as the engine died, I put the car in park. "Are you sure something isn't just broken?" she asked. "Who made your brakes? Wasn't it one of those quick shops?" "I made my own brakes," I said. "They were fine." "Let's lift the car and take a look," she chuckled. "Maybe you're missing something." I'm a certified auto mechanic. I work with the police to investigate damage to cars and, of course, illegal modifications. I was a little nervous since my X-Pipe wasn't technically legal in Michigan, but I wanted to see what she had to say about my brakes. So, I took my jack and lifted the front of the car. We removed the front left wheel and then placed the jack back stand she brought on the truck under the jacking point on the frame. "Damn it," she said. Huge 6-piston Brembo calipers, vented and cross-drilled rotors, and braided stainless brake lines. None of this is factory. And look, your brake lines have actually been cut. See that straight, sharp cut? When the stainless ones break, which almost never happens, they either wear away in some area from rubbing against something, or they tear, making their edges uneven. "Are you a mechanic or something?" she asked. I looked into her clear blue eyes as she looked at me. "Or something like that," I said. "He's an automotive engineer," Ray explained. "Oh," Bert said, looking up at me. "Why didn't you tell me this right away?" Ray pushed me to get between us. "Okay, Terry, this is an official investigation now," he said. "I'm going to bring them both in for questioning." "That's not a good idea," I said. He just looked at me. "I'm a trained police officer here," he said. "If we let them know we suspect them of trying to kill you, they won't try again. But if we let them think they succeeded, not only will they not try again, but they might confess." I said, "Your way they'll just say they didn't do anything, and it'll be my word against theirs. And since I'm now trying to divorce her and blaming him for the divorce, it'll look like I'm trying to set them up." "What are you suggesting?" he asked. The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. We barely managed to arrange everything. If Ray had not held such a high position in our small police force, we might not have been able to cope. Bert was a big help too. We went online and found a wrecked Mustang that had recently been in an accident. We quickly hired a crew to paint the wrecked red car black to match mine, and they dumped it on the grass near the highway exit. Although we had to make it appear that the brakes had failed, we still had to destroy the grass and weeds near the wreckage. We did this by driving Bert's truck roughly through the brush a few times and sliding through it right behind the wreckage. Bert and Ray laughed at me when they saw my face. We returned to the wreckage and made some finishing touches. I wasn't prepared to damage my car, but we replaced the yellow fog lights to make the car look like mine. I also didn't want to let Bert remove the calipers from my car, but I had an idea about it. I was confident that Brittany wouldn't be able to tell my Brembo calipers apart from any others, so we painted the calipers on the wreckage black and had 2 officers fake a conversation for Brittany's benefit. I was sure it would work. We also generously doused the wreckage with starting fluid just before Brittany arrived. We set fire to the wreckage, let it burn properly, and then put out the flames when Brittany arrived. Once everything was ready, Ray left to make one more stop. He went to my employer and explained what was happening. Together, they announced my death to the entire company staff. It was interesting to know how the people you know and work with react to such news. Most of my colleagues were saddened by the news. Some of them began to speculate who would take my place. I wish I could see it myself. Ray later told me that he was absolutely sure that Christina had nothing to do with my death unless she was the best actress on the planet. They had to call medical personnel to help her. He also noticed that her heart rate was going through the roof, and she had to be given medication and sent home. Even then, the counselors assigned to help everyone cope with grief could not console her. Ray asked me if there was anything I wanted to tell him, but we didn't have time to talk. While Ray went to break the news to Brittany, I sat in Bert's truck wearing a disguise in case she saw me. My disguise was funny. I had a visor with long hair covering my short brown hair. I wore big sunglasses, and Bert glued long sideburns and a fake beard onto my face. When Ray and Brittany arrived, I saw pure shock on Brittany's face. Ray wasn't as convinced as I was. He was sure that Brittany knew about my accident before he reported it. In his opinion, the only thing that shocked her was that I had died. He believed that Brittany hired someone to hurt me but not kill me, but something went wrong. This is where 2 other elements of my plan came into play. The first was that the announcement at work had a purpose. Since the Steroid King had a brother who worked in engineering with me, he would, of course, hear about my death. While we might not be able to observe his reaction as closely as Brittany's, he would certainly try to contact or see her. The second element was that while Brittany stood in tears looking at what was left of my smoking car, the technicians hired by my private investigator could examine the house and find out why my CCTV system was not working. If they couldn't determine the cause of the failure, they would have to install cameras that would function. Ray stayed with Brittany for some time. We understood that Brittany was taken to the hospital after she collapsed again. Bert found the idea of Brittany fainting extremely funny. "That's what you get for marrying one of these Muslim young ladies," she laughed. "Hey, Bert," I said. "Brittany is about 5 feet 6 inches tall, and your height, as I understand it, is 4 feet 10 inches. "I'm above this," she hissed. "I'm 5 foot -1, and I'm not flat-chested like your Brittany. She may be taller than me, but she's built like a boy." I sat down and started laughing. "Bert, compared to you, everyone is built like a boy," I laughed. Bert and I went to get something to eat and waited for Ray to come back. When he returned, there was a smile on his face. "I think it's a draw," he said. I looked at him in bewilderment. "I was trying to figure out which of your women faints faster," he said. "They're swooning sisters." Bert laughed. "Ha! You two should be on a comedy channel. Ray, you can take me back to the house. I need a shower and sleep." "You can't go back into the house, Terry," he laughed. "You're dead, remember?" "But Brittany is in the hospital," I said. "She'll never know I was there." "Yes, but her lover is probably keeping an eye on the house to see when she returns," he said. "I'm going to hide you in a safe house." "Wait a minute, I have a better idea." Bert and I followed Ray in her truck. I was still trying to understand why Bert continued to be with us, but I think she did what she liked. Ray drove slowly and made many sharp turns as if he didn't know where he was going. We caught up with him and noticed that he was looking down at his GPS. Bert snorted. He doesn't know where we're going either. Finally, we stopped in front of a beautiful condominium complex. "We're going to the 4th floor," Ray said. We got into the elevator and went upstairs. We walked down the carpeted hallway, and Ray stopped in front of the apartment. Someone could be heard crying inside. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. "Damn, we need to be quiet," he said. "Let me handle this," Bert said. "I'm a professional." She walked quietly to the door, and Ray stepped aside. Bert extended her hand, holding her little finger at an angle. She took a deep breath and then kicked the door as hard as she could several times. "Open the damn door right now, you damn," she screamed at the top of her voice. The door swung open, and an angry Christina stood in front of Bert with fire in her eyes. "Oh look," she said, "I thought I heard a mouse squeaking here. But here's a dwarf with double D breasts and a D brain." "I told you she's jealous of my breasts," Bert said. "They're double FS, if you want to know the truth." "Nobody cares about your balloons, you hobbit," Christina said. "Have you forgotten the way back to the Shire? I'm sure Frodo misses you." "I have your Frodo here," said Bert. "I'm not a lady," Bert said defiantly. "Gollum," said Christina. "Can we come in?" Ray intervened. "You two can do it," Christina said. Ray and I went inside. I almost managed not to laugh as Bert followed me. Christina sighed heavily. "It's no surprise that True Blood got cancelled," she said. "It was complete nonsense. I thought vampires weren't allowed to enter a house without an invitation." She looked at Bert as she said this. "Gore, there's your vampire," Bert said. "Christina, this is an official police matter," Ray said. "We need to use your apartment for—" "What?" asked Christina. "We need to hide an important witness here," Ray said. "Shouldn't you be finding out who killed Terry," she said. "That's not the point right now," Ray said. "Will you help us?" "No," said Christina. "Until you find Christy." I began, and her head whipped around as soon as I spoke. She looked at me and went weak in the knees. She came up to me and tore off my fake beard. "You an idiot," she screamed, hugging me. "I thought you—" "I was so—" She turned to Ray. "He can stay," she said quickly. "I'm not sure it's a good idea," Bert said. "It's dirty here. What if he gets sick?" "I have a lot of space, and I'm a consultant working with the police, so he—" "Ray, get out of here and take that troll with you," Christina said. She pushed Ray and Bert out into the hallway and closed the door behind them. Christina literally rushed at me. She hugged me and couldn't stop laughing. It was strange. "I'm so glad you're not dead," she sighed. That night, we just sat on her couch, and she hugged me. After a while, it started to seem strange. I'm not used to women other than Brittany hugging me or holding me. I knew I had to come to terms with it, so I just let Christina do what she needed to do. We spent several days like this. We just didn't do anything. We watched movies, and Christina went and brought us food. I missed working on the car but knew it would be a while before I saw both of my Mustangs again. The black one was in the police garage. Bert was said to have inspected every detail to make sure it was in order. The 67 was still disassembled into a million pieces in my garage. Speaking of a million pieces, my heart was broken into just as many. I had a hard time processing the fact that Brittany was part of the plan to kill me. The only time I was alone for more than a few minutes was when Christina decided she just had to go to my funeral. It wasn't a real funeral, it was a closed cremation. Christina returned with a video taken by the police at the ceremony. I saw that Brittany's parents, my fathers-in-law, Mr. and Mrs. Spots, were there. They seemed to really care about my death. I had to make it up to them somehow. When it was all over, the biggest shock for me was Brittany herself. Brittany is beautiful anyway, or at least she was. Brittany looked terrible at the funeral. Her eyes couldn't focus on anything, and her head was tilting from side to side. Ray and another officer were to escort her to the location. It took me a while to notice it, but then I realized she was heavily sedated. Brittany was barely conscious, and it was very sad to see this. I didn't even have the heart to confront her while she was like that. Christina said, "This is so depressed that they keep her under surveillance in case she decides to take her own life." I tried my best to keep a calm expression on my face. I was glad that Christina was so engrossed in her account of events that she did not look at me closely. All I could think about was that Brittany needed me. I wanted to rush to the hospital where she was and console her. Then I remembered that the reason Brittany was in the hospital was probably because she felt guilty for trying to kill me. It might have been even worse. Perhaps she just felt bad because she knew she had failed. 2 buckets were there too, Christina said. Who the hell are 2 buckets? I asked. Your little friend from another day, she said, looking at me out of the corner of her eye. One of the cops told me they nicknamed her 2 buckets because she wore a bikini to a police picnic a couple of years ago. Then they spent it on the beach. Basically, she was running around in a bikini and tore her bra. She ended up using 2 of the buckets that come with the kid sandbox set and some rope. She wore a cute black dress to your funeral. It was funny, she's so small and her breasts are so big, she just looked fat in that dress. While she was talking, Christina was taking off her clothes. The jacket was thrown towards the door. She unbuttoned her blouse as she walked towards me, pausing only a moment to free herself from her long tapered skirt. We looked into each other's eyes. It will happen, she said. Christy, I don't want to ruin our relationship, I said. You're too important to me. Yeah, she said. You want me? Before I could answer, someone knocked on the door. Christina collected her clothes from the floor and ran to her room. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. I didn't see anyone. Who's there? I asked. It's the police, someone shouted. I opened the door and saw Bert there, in the same black dress that Christina was talking about. Bert entered the apartment through the open door, swaying her hips slightly. She ran her finger across the coffee table and looked at it. Christina came out of the bedroom wearing a long robe. Oh damn, she said. The kids have already come for trick-or-treating. I didn't even know it was Halloween. You should have known, Bert said. Why else would you cover everything in a layer of dust if you didn't want to create a haunted house effect? Plus, you're wearing a skeleton costume under that robe. Haha, very funny, Christina replied. Haha, back to you, Christina angularly spat. Bert and I looked at her, wondering what she was talking about. My breasts are big enough to fill 2 buckets, said Bert, but real women have curves, and you only have lines. You have those small breasts that men hate. So what are you doing here anyway, spat Christina. I started to think that nothing has been happening in the case since Terry has been here with you, Bert said. Maybe you're the criminal. If so, then it's not very safe for him to live with you, and maybe his crazy wife and her accomplice can't do anything because she's under constant surveillance. That may indeed be true, said Bert. Where should I sleep? What are you talking about? Asked Christina. If Ray is going to watch him during the day, then someone should watch him at night, Bert said. No problem, I'll take care of it, Christina said. You have no police training, Bert said. You too, Christina laughed. Aren't you some kind of mechanic for the police? You're obviously very suited to mechanic work. I really see a monkey. Listen, little chest, I'm staying, said Bert. She turned to me. Where do you sleep, Terry? Right here on this couch, I pointed at it. I didn't think Bert needed to know that Christina was sleeping on the couch next to me. Plus, we didn't do anything other than cuddle, so it didn't matter. Christina was clearly annoyed but could not think of a way to get rid of Bert. Over the next few days, the 3 of us were inseparable. During the day, Ray and even my private investigators technicians were here. However, at night, the 3 of us sat on the same couch watching TV or playing board games. Finally, the day we had been waiting for arrived. Brittany was sent home. She was medication-free and discharged on her own. I didn't really want her in my house, but Ree told me that the best way to end this situation was to get her to confess to her involvement in my alleged murder. He also reminded me that if this happened, my divorce would go smoothly, and I would probably keep everything. It was also the day Christina had to return to work. She woke me up so we could have breakfast together, and as she turned to leave, she leaned over and kissed me. She was a slender but well-built woman. As soon as we get this pain out of my apartment, I'll take care of it for you, she whispered. She kissed me again and closed the door behind her. I didn't know what to think. Brittany always said that Christina had feelings for me, and this more or less confirmed it. The problem was that I wasn't sure of my feelings for her. Of course, I was very attached to Christina, but I didn't think it was anything more. There was little time to think. As soon as the door closed behind Christina, Bert, who had obviously been pretending to be asleep, rose to her feet and walked towards me. That's all we did that day, one more dream and more intimate. When the phone rang, Bert answered it but didn't say hello. There was tension in her voice as she simply reached back and handed me the phone. It was Christina. She wanted to know if I wanted her to pick up something for dinner on the way home or if we should cook something together. I chose Chinese takeaway, thinking this would give us time to clean up and ventilate the apartment. An hour later, when Christina returned home, she found me on the phone talking to my brother. Bert, fully dressed, sat on the sofa and smiled like a Cheshire cat. "Why does it smell?" Christina began. "Because we've been having a night all day," Bert started. "I was going to say it smells like air freshener," Christina said. She looked so upset that even Bert was affected. "It really is an air freshener," flat chest, Bert spat. "I was trying to cook dinner for us and I burned one of your pots. I don't know how to cook on a stove like that." Bert was great. It was her idea to put a couple of pots on the stove with some meat and let them burn. As the kitchen filled with smoke, we cleared the pots, sprayed air freshener throughout the apartment, showered separately, and waited for Christina to return home. Christina was clearly relieved. She could smell the air freshener, and if she sniffed hard enough, she could smell the burnt pan and meat underneath it. During dinner, Christina took my hand under the table. Whether it was guilt for what I had done or genuine feelings, I squeezed her hand back. Before we could finish dinner, someone knocked on the door. "Damn, there have been so many guests here lately," Christina said as she headed for the door. Behind her, Bert whispered, "That's so sweet," making gestures that imitated the way Christina held my hand. "It's so school-like," Bert whispered. "Hey, where's my plate?" laughed my brother Ray as he entered the apartment. Another man, whom I recognized as one of my private investigators' technicians, entered dragging a suitcase full of equipment. It took him about 20 minutes to set up what he had brought with him. Then we gathered around the computer screen and started watching. "Nice apartment," Bert grinned, looking at the video of my house. "Thanks. I'll probably do some repairs when this is all over," Christina said. Bert only laughed louder and longer. Ray and I just looked at each other in confusion. None of us understood women anyway. Ray began, "Guess who came to see Brittany today?" "Her cousin?" I started, but then I saw him on the screen. Anger overwhelmed me. "That's him," I said. "He's quite nice," said Bert. "I think you two are meant for each other." Christina smiled. "So far, they've only been hinting and arguing, but they haven't said anything we could use," the technician said. We sat watching and listening. Fred seemed nervous. We all knew it just by looking at him. It became clear to us that he expected me to jump out at him at any moment. Brittany, on the other hand, was so overcome with a mixture of guilt and grief that her actions were difficult to read. On the one hand, she spent most of her time making sure he didn't touch my things. I wanted to hug her when she wouldn't even let him into the garage, where they kept the parts for my 67. On the other hand, I couldn't wait to watch them in bed together. I was so full of anger that I wanted to run out and kill them both. In fact, it was Bert who pointed out several important facts to me. "She thinks you're dead, remember," she said. "You should also remember that she is scared to death and feels extremely guilty. She is not having a night with him, rather, she is punishing herself and making sure she is not alone. You women always support each other," I said. "Damn, I wish I could scare them. I wish there was a way to actually send my ghost there." "Damn it, this is it," Christina said. She jumped up and grabbed the phone. Christina spoke animatedly on the phone and then hung up after 10 minutes, leaving us all in disbelief. "He's flying in right now. He's between projects, but he's starting a new one in a week, so we have to finish everything before then," she said proudly. "Christina, who are we talking about?" I asked. "My brother," she said proudly. "Is he a movie star?" asked a very interested Bertha. "No, he's more of a nerd," Christina said, but he's a special effects wizard. He was part of the team that put on that Michael Jackson act at the award show. If they can do a dance in front of a live audience, it won't be hard to convince two people that they're seeing a ghost. The next morning, Ree went to the airport to pick up Christina's brother. He wasn't who we expected. He was large but also very botanical. He seemed clumsy and uncoordinated, but when it came to computers and science, he was great. He brought a lot of rental equipment with him and handed me a bill that was in the low 5-figure range. He looked at Bertha as if she were from another planet, but many men did that. "Don't worry," she whispered to me. "I wouldn't sleep with that nerd." The next day, we split our time between watching Fred and Brittany's relationship deteriorate and watching Christina's brother, Alvin, assemble the necessary equipment from a pile of computers, lasers, and beam-splitting mirrors. After Christina left to talk to the insurance company and sort out the issue of getting my insurance, Alvin and several other technicians set up 3 stages, one in our living room, one on the porch, and one on the street in front of my house. Each scene required a small set of hidden lasers and a small computer to control and synchronize the images. That evening, I was ready for my performance. We rented an empty storefront in town for my gigs and equipment storage. I had no idea how this technology actually worked. All I knew was that I had to stand in a certain spot, and the laser would hit the beam-splitting mirror. Part of the remaining beam would expand and capture my image, while the other part would fall on another mirror and be reflected differently. Both parts of the beam would be aimed and captured, and after that, my head started to spin. All I knew was that it worked and could be sent electronically anywhere that had lasers and the computers needed to manipulate the images. That evening, we gathered around and watched them on the computer screen. I stood ready. "Get ready!" I shouted. "Get ready!" Alvin shouted. I didn't know what to do. I jumped into my seat and just stood there. I was looking at the screen when Fred, that steroid jock, walked into the living room, saw what really seemed to me, and froze in horror before running back upstairs to Brittany. We were all happy and looked at them. They were even more scared, and Brittany was even more racked with guilt. The next evening, things were to be even better. That afternoon, Bertha fixed my brakes and put the wheels back on the car while Alvin worked on his equipment. While Alvin finalized his setup and went to buy or rent a few more things he thought would be useful, Christina and I were left alone. She kissed me. It didn't feel right, but I cared about her so much that I didn't want to reject her. She took off her clothes, and all I could do was compare her to Brittany in my mind. Christina had a very beautiful body. She was perfect in every way. We had a night. "I love you, Terry," she told me. "You don't have to reciprocate. I know you'll need time to get over Brittany. Your loyalty is one of the things I love most about you. You'll know when you feel it." That evening was even more tense. Brittany began to constantly quarrel and argue with Fred. Fred told her that as soon as they received the insurance money, he would leave. He made phone calls all day trying to find out something. She even refused to cook food for him. They went to a fast food restaurant to have dinner. This angered Fred because, as a bodybuilder, he had to maintain a certain diet. When they returned to the house, Bertha started my engine several times. The sound was transmitted to a set of tiny speakers we buried in the front yard. Hearing this sound, they went into a state of panic. Fred was so scared that he pushed Brittany aside to get into the house faster. They argued about it. Brittany swore she recognized the sound of my car, while Fred was in a state of denial brought on by his fear. When they returned to the house and saw my holographic image, they both turned deathly pale. I have to admit that I enjoyed seeing the fear in Fred's eyes. The next evening was to be my crowning scene. I was going to scare them to death. However, things didn't go as I expected. The plan was that we would attack them from all sides. First, they would hear the sound of a car outside. When they went outside, they would see my hologram in the front yard. They would run back into the house, and my hologram would appear inside the house, chasing them. We wanted them to start blaming each other for my death or at least admit to what they had done. We were almost sure they would break. They were already starting to attack each other. Alvin found a way to use video footage for holograms. It was good because I wanted to be there when the police came to take them to jail. Ree, myself, and a few other cops were hiding in the backyard across the street when the show started. At least this moment went as we expected. We were in constant contact with Alvin, who informed us of what was happening in the house. Alvin told us that this was the right time because they were on the verge of a complete breakup. I was looking forward to the start of the performance. If my brother hadn't warned me not to make any noise so as not to give everything away, I would have performed my best supervillain laugh. We heard the sound of my Mustang's engine roaring. Damn, it sounded amazing. I wished at that moment that it sounded as good inside the car when I was driving it as it did outside. Suddenly, as we had planned, the door opened, and they both ran outside to look around. I was amazed at how real the holograms looked. It seemed as if my car was actually parked on the street in front of the house. I watched as the door opened, and it felt like I was getting out of a car. Then the plan went awry. We saw Fred retreat from fear. However, Brittany reacted completely differently. "Terry, I made a mistake," she screamed. "But I never stopped loving you." "Love it!" Fred shouted. Fred was a very big man. He wasn't used to being afraid of anyone or anything, so he pulled out something he thought would even the odds. He pulled out a gun and started shooting at the holographic image of me. The bullets went straight through the image and into the house across the street. I later found out that Fred had bought a gun with silver bullets. Someone told him that silver bullets could stop a ghost. From that moment on, everything went in slow motion. Everyone acted on instinct. When Brittany saw Fred shooting at the hologram, she instinctively threw herself between Fred and the image. Fred, seeing that the silver bullets he had paid so much money for were not stopping the hologram, continued to fire. I never thought it was possible, but somewhere inside me, something broke, and I ran out of hiding and rushed at Brittany to protect her. Then Fred broke down. Seeing the two of me, he started shooting at both of them. When the fog cleared, 2 days had passed. My throat was as dry as the Sahara, and my left shoulder hurt like hell. I also had a headache that rivaled the worst migraines. I heard voices and crying. "For God's sake, Brittany, shut up!" Bertha shouted. "It's all my fault," Brittany sobbed next to me. "It really is." I muttered, "Can you please be quiet? I have a headache." "After a few weeks of treatment and a little physical therapy, you'll be good as new," Bertha said. "We won't be happy," said Bertha. "Is Fred in jail?" I asked. "Did he confess?" "No and no," replied Bertha. "Fred won't admit to anything because he's dead." "Your brother did it anyway," Christina said. "It all worked out somehow." "Terry, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I realized that what happened between us was a mistake." "Christina, you're making a fool of yourself." Brittany's head whipped around, and she glared at Christina. "I can't believe you slept with my husband," she hissed. "You just couldn't wait, huh?" "He's not exactly your husband anymore," added Bertha. Brittany stood up from the chair she was sitting on. I noticed that on one of her graceful ankles, she was wearing a large bracelet that looked like a watch. I also noticed that her leg was heavily bandaged. "Brittany, what's wrong with your leg?" I asked. "She was shot, Sherlock," Bertha said. "Am I going to have to deal with all this crap myself?" She looked around. "Hell yeah, looks like it is," she said. "So, Terry, Christina feels bad because she loves you." "No!" Brittany screamed. "Brittany, sit down on your sore fifth place and shut up." Bertha spat. "If you interrupt me again, I'll tell Ree that you tried to take off your bracelet." Brittany's eyes filled with tears, and she sat up. She clearly didn't want to hear about what happened between Christina and me. "So, like I said, Christina feels bad because she loves you, but she cheated on you last night and the night before while you were unconscious. I was hoping she'd figure it out on her own, but it looks like you'll have to help me. Terry, when you had a night with Christina, how did you feel?" "It made me feel good," I replied. "Do you want her?" Bertha asked. "Are you attracted to her, or did you just do it because she wanted to?" "I didn't want to hurt her feelings," I said, "because I really love her." Brittany began to sob, and Bertha glared at her. "Love without desire," said Bertha. "You love her like a sister, right?" I thought about it and realized that Bertha was right. "And you, Christina, be honest. Think about it." You felt the same way, didn't you? It wasn't what you got last night or the night before with another person, was it? Bertha asked. Probably not, Christina said. And if you really loved him as much as you think you do, I don't think you would have cheated on him so early in the relationship. Heck, it took Brittany 5 years to cheat on him, Bertha said. But they still had an intimate. Brittany sobbed. I don't care if it wasn't good. Who said it wasn't good? Asked Bertha. Christina talked about it all the time, but I never got anything like that from Fred, Brittany said. I succumbed to desire and found myself used as a woman of easy virtue, and in exchange for this, I lost everything. I lost the man I loved to his damn secretary. He fell in love, and all I got was nothing. Terry, I didn't love Fred. I've never loved anyone but you. But you still humiliated me, I told her. Never, she blurted out. I was just lost. I made a bad decision, and it led to a series of other bad decisions. By the time I finally realized what was going on, you had already kicked me out of the house. You didn't even want to talk to me, for the man who swore to love me forever. You pretty quickly put me out on the street and jumped into bed with Christina. Why shouldn't I do it? I asked. For me, our marriage ended long before Christina and I slept together. At least what we did was between two people who have feelings for each other. I didn't just give myself to the first person I met. What about what happened between us? Asked Bertha. Terry, did you sleep with her too? Brittany asked. Who's talking about sleep? Bertha said and began to tell all the details of night with me. Enough! Brittany screamed, her eyes so full of tears that she could hardly see. No, I got it, said Bertha. You instigated it, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was the best intimate of my life. But honey, you don't have to worry, what happened between Terry and me was just night. He loves you. He loves you, not me and not Christina, at least not in the in-love sense. But I don't love him either, I love his car. Does he really love me? Brittany asked. Her mood improved noticeably after this statement. Brittany, that man took a bullet for you. Why else would he do that? Asked Bertha, shaking her head. I don't love her anymore, I said angrily. Bertha just laughed. I was kept in the hospital for 3 more days for observation. Brittany came to the hospital every day. The first day, we just glared at each other for an hour, and then she burst into tears. You did something to her that we never did, she cried. What difference does it make? I asked. Because all I did with her was regular intim, she spat. She looked me closely in the eyes as she spoke. You didn't use any protection, did you? She asked. At first, I didn't say anything. Bertha is taking her pills, I suggested. Even when I wasn't myself, I never risked getting pregnant. If I ever have a baby, it will be yours, she hissed. What do we do if you get one of them pregnant? Since we're gone now, you don't have to worry about that, I spat. After that, we just stared at each other again. The next day, she was late from the beginning of the visitation time. I was worried about where she was. When she walked through the door, I was finally able to relax. You don't need to waste your time visiting, I said. Sorry I'm late, she said. I had to testify to the prosecutor again. If I didn't do this, I would be sent to prison, and it also takes a long time to get from my parents' house to the city center. Why don't you stay in the house? I asked. I thought you didn't want me there, she said. You'll obviously get everything in the divorce, even if I don't go to jail. She started crying again. Brittany, calm down, I said. Terry, Fred promised me that you wouldn't be hurt too much, she sobbed. You had to be, for you to need me to take care of you. I thought it would work, and I could get you back. I swear, all I wanted was to get you back. Brittany, I'll call Ree, I said. I won't sue you, Terry. I'll go to prison gladly if you'll wait for me, she cried. I will spend the rest of my life happily in prison if you don't divorce me. Brittany, I began. Terry, I know you still love me, she said. I made a mistake. I made the worst mistake, and I'll spend my whole life making up for it. I was a spoiled, ungrateful, but I learned my lesson. I swear I'm going to be the best wife in the world. Can you just think about it? When I was discharged, Brittany came to take me home. She took care of me like a little child. She came over every day and stayed with me all day. One evening, I noticed how tired she was. She ended up falling asleep on the couch and apologized for it the next morning. I told her it was no problem and that she could use the guest room while we sorted out our relationship. Ree and I both testified on Brittany's behalf, and she received 2 years probation. She got her sentence commuted because she cooperated with prosecutors to help bring mechanic Fred to justice, and because Ree and I stood up for her. It was also the first time she found herself in trouble with the law. As the strength in my shoulder began to return and the headaches began to subside, I returned to work. Brittany still came every day. She even came to my work and brought me lunch. One of these days, as we sat together in my office, I was surprised by Bertha's appearance. To my surprise, Bertha came not to me but to Christina. They now lived together. What surprised me even more was that the mystery person Christina was having a night with turned out to be Bertha. When we got home that evening, I decided to offer Brittany a better option for dividing her property in the event of a divorce. She was horrified. "Brittany, I'm just trying to make you happy," I said. "If you want a house, you can keep it." "Terry, all I want is you and another chance," she said. "I love you, Terry. If you want a divorce, I'll give it to you, but I'm not going to make it easy for you. I'm not going to help you leave me." We didn't discuss divorce anymore. A few days later, I was back working on the 67. When I opened the garage to look at the car, the first thing I noticed was that all my parts were neatly laid out. My tools were also neatly arranged, and all my drawings and plans were neatly placed on the wall where I could look at them. I turned to go into the house and thank Brittany, but she was already standing there. "Is this fine?" she asked. I simply nodded. Brittany stepped into the garage, and I saw what she was wearing. She was wearing a light blue shirt, the kind that gas station mechanics wear. Her name was embroidered on the left chest pocket. "I'm your assistant," she said. I simply nodded and began to disassemble the remaining parts from the frame. Brittany handed me the tools. "You're wrong about me, you know. It's not one-sided love." "What?" I asked. "The first day I came home after you sent me to my parents, you hummed a song," she said. She pressed a button on the stereo in the garage. That song was One Way Love from the movie Better Off Dead. I remember humming it while trying to ignore Brittany. Remember the line, "I fell too hard, apparently I'm not the same"? She handed me a screwdriver. "You were always the one, Terry. I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you." Looking into the night, she continued, "I don't know where you are, calling your name. It's a crazy feeling, one-sided love. It took me a while to figure it out," she said. "You thought you loved me more than I loved you, and maybe in the old days that was true. I was young and spoiled and didn't think about anyone but myself. But now that I know what it means to be without you, everything has changed. I need you, Terry, and I love you more than you could love me. Remember when that idiot Fred started shooting at your ghost, and I tried to jump in front of him?" she asked. I was listening to the song and thinking about that part. I listened to the chorus of the song. "I'd rather be stupid, I'll get lost with someone new. I'd rather be dead than live without you. I search every day trying to find another way. I'd rather be dead than live without you. That's why I jumped in front of the bullets," she said. "I'd rather be dead than live without you, Terry." There were no further words. I took her hands in mine and pulled her to the floor. If this were a romantic movie, we would have an intimate right there on the garage floor. However, this floor was concrete. After the kiss, I picked her up and carried her to our bedroom. We lay in each other's arms in a way that only people who truly love each other can. "Terry, I don't want to catch you in anything, but this is my most fertile time," she said. "I'll go back on the pills if you want because our future status is still a little uncertain." We didn't use protection that night. All this told me that we belonged together. However, from the moment Brittany and I got together, I knew there would be no divorce. I also knew that neither of us would ever love anyone else with the same intensity. And I was wrong. 2 years later, I stood in church holding Christina's hand. Christina was finally going to be the last Mrs. Stevens. She became Mrs. Ray Stevens. Christina was marrying my brother, and I walked her down the aisle. This was our second wedding this summer. 5 weeks ago, Bertha married Christina's brother, Alvin. As the priest spoke his words, I looked up to the third row and saw my pregnant wife, Brittany, sitting next to the only person I loved as much as she did, our almost 2-year-old daughter, Terry. Brittany and I were fine. I'd like to say we lived happily ever after, but until that happens, we can't say that for sure. I think this is one of the reasons why our marriage is so strong. We know firsthand that anyone can make a mistake and make a decision that costs them everything. Brittany knows better than most wives what will happen if she slips up again, and neither of us is willing to risk that.